Hello, my name's Toby Jeavons. I'm an associate partner at RSHP, and I was the project architect for the new Macallan distillery and visitor experience in Speyside, Scotland, between 2012 and 2018. And I'm pleased to be joined for this short presentation with our principal client, George McKenzie.
Hi, hello folks. My name's, as Toby has said, is George McKenzie, and my role is UK Engineering Manager for Edrington, of which Macallan is one of our major sites.
Fantastic, thank you, George. So for the Architecture Today Awards, which were focused on buildings that have been completed within a minimum of 3 years, the essence was to describe how the building may have stood the test of time. So I'll give a brief introduction to the development of the project, the evolution of the design, and then move on to 3 parts that have hopefully evolved and developed well since the building has been operating and open to the public since 2018, in the way that the landscape has developed and integrated over time, the way that the production side of the building has continued to work and hopefully satisfy the client's needs, and the visitor experience portion of the brief as well, and then how the building as a whole has hopefully factored into and actually become part of the brand identity for Macallan as the brand has continued to move on. So I'll start with a little bit of design evolution. We were invited along with a number of others to a design competition in 2012 for a new production distillery and visitor experience. This image shows Easter Elki's house as we were shown it at the time, and this is a very important building. It's the sort of ancestral house that is on the estate. It's a sort of centerpiece of the brand, and you can actually even see adjacent to the text logo that the house is used as a key piece of branding and is features on all of the bottles of Macallan. Important for the project was that whatever the nature of the architectural response, that the architectural design was not intended to overshadow or be overbearing to Easter Elki's house, and that Easter Elki's house was always meant to be able to retain that home of the brand position and status. So as part of the competition, we were shown around the site, we were shown the existing facilities, of which this is a photo, as well as get the opportunity to meet George and his colleagues. This was interesting for us, obviously first introduction to the actual copper stills and some of the materiality of the existing distillery. You can see the open grill floor, the beautiful sort of material nature of the copper itself, and in fact the timber ceiling. And we were obviously absorbing all of this as we took it into the design. Macallan particularly proud of their copper stills, curiously small as they describe them, and this particular image, or an image very similar to this, featured on the one of the Scottish £10 notes. So this was a very proud element of the brand, which we were then keen to celebrate as we took the design on. The site itself, very beautiful part of Speyside, adjacent to the River Spey here. This image is now in 2024 reasonably out of date, but at the time it was a good image at the beginning of the competition. It shows the Spey at the base and a number of various different warehousing buildings. The plot for the project was already designated from George and the team, and you can see at the bottom a sort of beautiful Telford Bridge, and the whole area is peppered with distilleries, so distilleries are part of the landscape. And importantly for ourselves, we realised that the site is part of a landscape protected designation called an area of great landscape value. And that's a sort of protected portion of landscape that follows a corridor adjacent to the River Spey. And as soon as we realised this, working with Graham Sturck, our design partner, Graham was very keen to leverage that that protected landscape designation and see if that might be something that's interesting to play with and work with a ground effect building as we went into the concept design. So part of the competition boards looked at basic site analysis, site response type diagrams. This is already sort of the sketch section at the base is already starting to show where the design would be going, but very definitely a back to the building, process road. The topography of the site falls down to the river, so opportunity to leverage views out to the River Spey. And we wanted to make particular connection to Easter Elkie's house. So if I just use the cursor, you can see the little yellow house here, Easter Elkie's. So that forms a sort of physical and a sort of metaphoric link between the old house and what would be the new visitor centre here. And then a series of production cells that moved off to the north, as you can see in this response diagram over here, and the beginnings of a ground effect building alluded to in the sketch section at the bottom. The competition itself required an element of phasing, or a phasing opportunity, and the full ultimate capacity at the time of the competition was not defined, and we had to demonstrate that we could show the building could expand over time. And so we started to develop, along with the input, very good input that George and the team had provided, all the teams, a production module, an amount of production equipment that would provide 5 million litres of production, annual spirit production. And so we were able to show by replicating that module that we could increase it up to a theoretical capacity. And after we were lucky enough to win the project, that was established at the current 15 million annual litres of production. And you can see that we knew very little about how to make whiskey, so we were having to investigate that, do various different diagrams, and do a lot of research into the background of how you make whiskey during that early competition time. Architecturally, as I say, Graham was very interested in a ground effect type building and seeing if we could do something that was sensitive to the landscape of the site. And the architecture that was on the site was very disparate in nature. You have Easter Elkie's house, a sort of old manor house. We have a series of fairly utilitarian warehouses, and then actually some much newer, larger in scale utilitarian warehouses, which are on the top of the hill behind the site. And Graham was considering what's the sort of clue, what's the thing that we might hook onto as a way of where do we take the design. And I think he describes it as going back in time to a much more ancient influence, looking at circular block structures, the moray well, which is the doorway image at the bottom of the screen here, and a long cairn, so sort of stone mounds that you can see to the bottom right, and using that by way of influence, and then taking these things all together along with the actual evident profile of the hillside on the horizon, started to develop a concept response along with this repetitive production cell that was happening internally. So I'll move through this quite quickly now. This is just to give us context. You can see the visitor experience towards the southern end of this image, 3 repetitive distillation cells with a mash house to the north of the site, which is what feeds the rest of the production facility, with the roof itself flowing over the top. We could talk about the roof separately. You can see that these undulating domes sit on all of the production equipment, and you can see a sort of halo of different venting arrangements that are very carefully coordinated and reflect what's happening beneath, and then a more elongated dome above the visitor experience to give emphasis to the point of entry. A third part of the brief was the supporting tank farm for all of the incoming grains and the outgoing products, and we actually were able to place those along a new service road, which is cut into the hillside and that's actually just has a vented portion of the timber roof that sails over the top of that road to the rear of the scheme. And just some of the general arrangement drawings to give setting and context there. You can see the circular arrangement. We wanted to sort of celebrate this arrangement of production equipment. So we have fermenting washback vessels, which are in bead blasted stainless steel around the outside, and then the hand beaten copper pot stills in the center, which are slightly elevated for their own production reason, but that helps to just kind of put them on a pedestal, so to speak, and the visitor experience to the left-hand side. And a long section and a cross section as well. See the service road here running along the side of the scheme. I'll get into the coordinating nature of the process design as we move on. So since the project finished in 2018, the landscape was obviously such a key part of the project as that has had time to really bed in. And I think it's fair to say that we're thrilled by the way in which this has now really started to take shape. Visiting site now is incredibly lush, incredibly rich landscape that has settled. The site's located on what was originally an old barley field, and this has been the roof is now lifted off of the floor as if that old piece of site is lifted up above the production facility. Again, you see the halo of different venting arrangements which reflect what's happening internally. George, from a client's perspective, I think initially working with the contractors, a little bit of understanding as to how to manage the landscaping is probably fair to say, but I think it's settled well now, no?
Yes, it certainly has, Toby. Just to reiterate some of what Toby said there, although the site in Macallan is relatively large, over 400 acres, the actual area that we could build on was small and fell in this area of great landscape values, as Toby described. So this design was just ideal for that, and getting it through the local planning office. So that was really first class. And as Toby says, now that we've had 6 years of the roof to integrate into the landscape, it's just incredible how it looks now.
Yeah, thank you, George. It was also interesting for ourselves. The brief didn't necessarily ask for the production distillery and the visitor experience programs to be co-located into one building. They could have, in theory, have been two separate elements on the site, but we chose to put both functions together under one sort of oversailing roof, because I think we felt that the visitor experience was very definitely linked to the production of Macallan, and that, you know, if you've traveled halfway around the world to see where Macallan is made, you really want to be able to see the actual production equipment. And so for us, it was very important that as you enter, the visitor experience is essentially the reception to the distillery. And as we move through, you'll see that the line that is this grid line here between the visitor experience and the rest of the production distillery, it is a very important aspect of the scheme. And there's a glazed partition wall through here that cuts through down the building. This is essentially a piece of thermal envelope. This is a sort of an assembly portion of the building. So this falls subject to building regulations, heating, and energy conservation. This portion of the building, which is the production distillery, is essentially a factory and actually is essentially outside of the thermal envelope of the building. So there's an internal wall down here, albeit glazed, which is part of the thermal envelope. And the production distillery generates a lot of heat as a consequence of its process. So when we put the green roof over the top, whilst we are obligated to insulate the visitor experience, in theory, we weren't obligated to insulate this portion of the building, but we wanted to, and in fact, it became necessary because we were concerned that the possible drying effect of the hot air within the distillery might actually have a negative impact on the green roof. So we obviously wanted the build-up to be consistent across the whole roof as well. So that's an important point to make. And Graham was also very keen that whilst this is a ground effect building and evidently is cut into the hillside and is trying to mitigate its impact, that it was never meant to disappear. It's not meant to be so soft in its form and seamless that it becomes invisible. It was always intended to be an engineered landscape. And so the timber roof beneath this green roof, which has got a 3-meter grid, and in fact you can just see it by the grid that's evident on the roof here, was then actually expressed on the top surface by a series of gravel channels which are laid across the whole roof. And this is a sort of orthogonal projection, a pure orthogonal projection of the 3-meter grid. So it's not a distorted grid, it's just a straight projection. And that was important because we want to see the structure and we wanted to use that gravel grid network as a utility network for lightning protection, irrigation. There's a limited amount of power that needs to get to actuated vents in the visitor centre. So if you have to return to the roof, you know where to go. You don't have to dig up the whole roof to get to services, and that was very important as well. So there's a series of images here. I won't say so much as I just turn over a few of these images. They're fairly self-evident. One of the things that we did do, having said that, I won't say anything, was that because the scheme is cut into the hillside, it generated a lot of spoil, a lot of spoil, and it was very important that that didn't go off-site. We didn't want to take it off-site for lots of sustainable reasons, as well as for economic reasons. We wanted to keep that spoil on site. And so what we were able to do was take the spoil from here and actually relocate it, recontour some of this hill behind the project, and in fact in front of the project as well, and do that in a very curated way to organise certain views. As you enter the scheme, you get glimpsed views in a very organised fashion. And in time, there's also a tree planting scheme associated with the increased levels on the back, so that in time those trees will mature further as well, just to help to soften some of the visual impact of the maturation warehouses on the hill as well. You can see here the connection between the visitor experience and Easter Elk is very important. And you enter up through this point here. You can see the same seed mix is on the field in front as is on the roof. We worked very closely here in collaboration with Gillespie's landscape architects, who are located both in London and in Scotland, along with Sky Gardens, who are a specialist green roof supplier, who then in turn worked with Scotia Seeds to ensure that we had an appropriate seed mix to the location. It's always intended to be quite naturalistic. It's not a manicured surface in that sense, and that helps to be it helps to protect itself by keeping it a little wilder. And the view back, very definitely axial view back from the exit back towards Easter Elk is as you leave the scheme as well. And then I've got a short video which I think just shows the green roof a little better than the still images. And then moving on to the second thing, which is the production and sustainability and use. So this is really more about the working distillery itself. And George will be able to comment on this as a client, having lived and worked with the building for the years since it's been open. but the project was designed as one. Although the production equipment and the process design was essentially a separate contract, it was being designed and integrated into the shell and core design seamlessly. It was one overall design team. We were working very closely with George and George's engineering team from the client, along with Foresights, who are the specialist process engineers and process manufacturers. And we were working hand in glove, both to organize and set out this arrangement of process equipment, and then in detail how various events were having to engage with the shell and core, as you can see in this cutaway image, so that it was done in a very organized and coordinated way. The intention was to set ourselves the challenge, at least, of providing the most coordinated sort of engineering plant, coordinated distillery in the world. And hopefully some of these images are testament to all the hard work that everyone across the whole team to try and achieve that. This is an image at the lower level of the production distillery. Visitors are not allowed here. They're walking at the upper gantry, but you can see the amount of care and attention that was placed into organising all of the pipe work into a systemized way.
If I could just step in there for a moment,
Please, George, yeah.
and just say that the one aim we couldn't move from was the chief executive had said, whatever we do here, we can't change the character of the final product. And that may sound simple, but it's not. I mean, the whisky making process, although quite traditional, it is very susceptible to change. And a small change can make a big change to the character of the final product. So Toby and his team learned very quickly the whisky making process and what parameters we could change and what one we couldn't. And our design engineers, process engineers, worked along with Toby and his colleagues to produce what is no doubt a magnificent looking distillery, but also produce the product that has the character of Macallan. And that was evident from the first production run that we had allowed to be scrapped, because that would be in the commissioning. Actually, the very first production run gave us a product, a liquid, that we considered fit to fill into casks for onward maturation. So yeah, Toby and his team learned very quickly what the process involved and where we could play a bit with it in tunes, but the other parts that just had to remain as is. And you can see from that we worked very, very hard to achieve that, and we certainly have, as the character of the whisky has remained unchanged from that first fill 6 years ago, and we are still doing the same now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great, George. Thank you. And I mean, when we actually set this presentation up initially, we didn't talk about specifically a maturation space, but what George has just said is absolutely spot on. And another part of the scheme that was introduced was a small maturation room. It's captured towards the end of the presentation. And that had it, just for the benefit of this presentation, it is really interesting because that brought with it a whole series of technical challenges along the lines of what George is alluding to. Within the small maturation room, we had to ensure that the conditions were such that, again, the product that was being matured in there was still Macallan in every way, similar to every other maturation environment. So, again, these are production images for the lower part of the distillery. The lighting scheme, we worked with Spears and Major lighting designers, and it covers both utilitarian factory lighting, but also theatre lighting, essentially, and how those two systems can work together. This is a volatile environment as well, so all of the lighting and electrical equipment has to be of a particular ATEX rating. But you can see here that Spears and Major developed a sort of a colour temperature approach, whereby the fermentation vessels if I go back one, you can see in the foreground, fermentation vessels are lit with a cooler blue light, and then the central distillation vessels, which get very hot, have this warmer red light. And certainly in the nighttime, this is very powerful. And there's all sorts of opportunities for theatrical lighting effects to be moved throughout the scheme. As you can see here, a shot as if lying on the floor, looking up through a central aperture. And this is an axial view looking along the length of the building through a centre of the various still houses there. We didn't want anything to touch the roof, as you can see here. So there are no services hanging from the roof, no lighting hanging from the roof. And so there we have a whole series of venting requirements, and these lighting poles were established. So everything comes from the floor up. The sustainability. So from a production perspective, a distillery is very energy consuming by its nature. We're lucky enough to be able to work with an adjacent biomass plant. The adjacent biomass plant was able to generate steam, which Macallan as a customer was planning to do anyway, and we were able to utilise that when the project was being developed. So the new Macallan distillery is able to get, and George will correct me, or about 90% of its primary heat is able to come from a renewable source. And because there's also then a lot of waste heat as a result of the process, we're able to then capture that low-grade waste heat and also use that as a preheater for the portions of the visitor experience, for the underfloor heating, hot water demands. And so there's a very cyclical, good beneficial story as far as sustainable energy use. And then obviously there's the 13,000 square metre timber roof as well, and all of the concrete is utilising pulverised fuel ash as a cement replacement, which has a dramatic beneficial impact on the embodied carbon as well. But George, from a production perspective, living with the scheme, it's continued to...
It's continued to perform as it did on day one, Toby, and we, as a client, are delighted with the outcome from it. And the stills continue to produce grade A spirit that we're happy with, and in the 6 years it's been running, we have had no unplanned downtime. So yeah, delighted. Like you say, the using the heat for the visitor centre, that again has been a major success, that cutting down the need for energy, inputting energy to the visitor centre. Yeah, so as a client, delighted.
Brilliant. Thank you, George. So going to the visitor centre, again, as I said earlier, the visitor experience was seen as a reception to the whole facility, not a separate building, and not a black box visitor experience that could almost be located anywhere. You are on site, you're where the product's actually being made, you need to experience that, you need to be able to get up close to it. So you do enter into the visitor experience, and from here you are able to see this full height glazed wall that you can see here in this image, that from the visitor experience gives you a view directly into the production distillery where the spirit is manufactured. The Macallan, as an organisation, when we were doing the competition, had already established a series of brand pillars, which had been long-standing for many years, which talked about the various different important aspects that made Macallan what it is. And those brand pillars were weaved into the design of the visitor experience route. As you make your way around the distillery, you get to experience these. And we worked with a German-based experiential company called Atelier Bruckner for that. And you can see from this image the sort of notional route that was intended. The arrow line obviously represents people moving through the space with a series of touchstones along the journey, which would tell you and explain various different aspects of each of the brand pillars as you move your way around. So that is the case, that's in place, and there's an incredible archive wall as well, which was introduced with Atelier Bruckner and the team at Macallan, having archived this incredible history of advertising and bottles and the full archive history of the product. Along with that, there are generous breakout spaces which the team, since the project has opened, have been able to leverage for opening events, promotional opportunities, and to just use the building as a backdrop for launches of all sorts of kinds. So these are some of the fixed points that were part of the original brand pillars. But then moving beyond that, some sort of spectacular special events have been able to be housed there. And I think this has gone beyond how we may have envisaged it. So I think that's the point about standing in the test of time, that actually the project has started to take on a life of its own, and the clients inhabiting it, using it for other ways that may or may not have been fully imagined initially. So
yeah, it certainly has, Toby. I mean, initially it was always going to be the home of the brand, but now it is a real home. Now any new expression that's launched worldwide gets launched from the new distillery building. So it's excellent.
And as you can see from, these are images which George and his colleagues kindly passed on to us afterwards, so you could evidence how various different affiliations and corporate associations are made with sort of Bentley. Further to the Skyfall movie, there's an association between Macallan and the James Bond franchise, and there have been associated promotional events for that. And I think you've even had a couple of gigs on site as well, George. Yeah, so it's kind of taken on a new sense of other opportunities have presented themselves as the building as people have got more and more used to it. So which is great.
Yeah, without a doubt. Initially, we were open to the public by people could just turn up and go on a tour. It became so popular that we've now had to close that, and all tours are now by invitation only. So you have to book a tour now to get on the tour. It's become that popular. But not only through whisky lovers, but also through, we get architectural tours and structural engineers, and even the timber people have been round, all amazed at this building. And so, yeah, and that's great to see that it's not just the whisky aficionados that want to look at this building. It's the whole array of different professionals. And
this space, which was termed the Cave Privé by one of George's colleagues, is a private cellar, and it's in the center of the visitor experience. So when you walk into the visitor experience, there's a cylindrical volume in front of you, which has got the reception desks sort of honed out of it. And on top of that is the bar. But within that space is this circular warehouse. And this was partly because at the very beginning of the project, this part of the program didn't exist. There wasn't a maturation space. And it very quickly became apparent that that was a missed opportunity, that there should be a warehousing opportunity for visitors to see when they're on site, because the timber and the maturation of Macallan is so particularly important. And so, but as I mentioned earlier, and after George referred to the importance of the Macallan being unchanged in its spirit quality, so placing a warehouse in the center of an otherwise heated assembly space brought with it its challenges. So And this again is a volatile environment. So all of these barrels are full of maturing whiskey. So that's quite a heavy fire load. So this is a circular space, which in itself is a 2-hour fire compartment within the center of the visitor experience, which had to have an external environment equivalent to the environment outside, the atmosphere outside, so that the whiskey maturing was undergoing the same climatic conditions as whiskey maturing in an adjacent warehouse. Because obviously the last thing you would want is, after a number of years, realizing that this isn't up to scratch. So this one space brought with it a whole series of technical challenges, which made it all the more interesting. And of course, it has a theatrical nature to it, which is hopefully very impactful. At the end of a tour, you come into this circular space, a tasting can happen, and the lights come up, and there you are, surrounded by these barrels. And that's the view from within the space, looking back at the viewing platform stroke tasting area. And then really the final thing was just looking forward, and something that whilst as an architect you might be hopeful has a possibility of being able to be a sort of brand ambassador on a sort of brand home such as this building is, I think, you know, we couldn't be more proud, I think, of the fact that Macallan have taken the scheme to heart in the way that it appears that it has. And so these are not installations that we are party to. They're not accurate reflections of parts of the building necessarily, but they are evidently informed by the architecture of the building, and the building has become something of a brand motif in itself. So these are retail concessions in various airports around the world. I think the images are Terminal 5 at Heathrow, Hong Kong, and at Singapore. And it's just great to see that within those concessions, the architecture of the distillery is so evidently been brought as part of the brand identity itself.
Yeah, the shape of the building now features on many of the high-end expressions of Macallan on the label itself.
And so I think, and then the final thing that we finished with in the presentation in September was a short video, a short advert, which again RSHP have had nothing to do with. We weren't even really aware of it. In preparation for this presentation in September 23, I asked whether there was some more promotional material to evidence that the project has been used in a promotional way. And then I was able to see the little advert that we'll play at the end of this, where it's an advert from Macallan, but where the location, the backdrop, the building is evidently proudly being used as a backdrop for the advert. And it's just great to see, and hopefully that evidence is that the building has stood the test of time, and hopefully will continue to form a key part of Macallan in the future.
Yeah, if I could just finish off, Toby. I mean, the building, yes, it's in two parts. There's the production area, the factory area, and the guest experience area. And both parts, I mean, the production area is just doing everything it said we wished it would, and it's continuing to do that, producing first grade spirit at a level, a volume that we're looking for. The visitors, the guest experience end, it's just grown beyond anyone's expectations. Now, all our distributors from around the world all come to the distillery to be immersed in Macallan and educated. We now have a Macallan university there for these presentations. All the new launches are made at the distillery, and it's just went beyond what anyone expected at the beginning. So yeah, as a client, tremendously proud. We still have people coming in awe at the building. They come into the building and just are in shock at the beauty. So yeah, we couldn't have hoped for anything better than we've got there now.